Okay, howdy everybody. Happy Friday, happy Good Friday. Today we're going to finish up the topic on human-centered design that kind of stems around the Don Norman chapters that you read. So usability, the concept of usability, is a good way to describe when we've successfully bridged our gulfs of execution and evaluation. It's when, our ability to interface as a human with the technologies, with the physical elements of the system is as smooth as possible. It is enjoyable, and it is intuitive and, follows our expectations. Today with this one, we're gonna briefly kind of define this concept of usability according to a couple of, experts on this area, and then I'm gonna go through a method called a usability heuristic analysis, which is very universally applicable to a lot of different things. So, including your project, if it's something that you want to try to do here. Okay. So first of all, yes, here's our definition: the ease of use and learnability of a human-made object. And I would add to that that a human is intended to interface with. Yep, if we've bridged the gulfs of execution and evaluation satisfactorily, then you would say we have a usable system. And this is an interesting thing: www.usability.gov. So this is a government website, and that always confused me. And so I was Googling, at some point this week, why is it a .gov website? And it's because there's so many government applications, websites, human-facing technologies that the government needs to interface well with your average human. So if you think about things like, well, how does your average person in the United States handle their taxes? And the tax form is something that has to interface, with a human. And how well does that? And I would argue not that well. But in any case, these are methods that the United States government considers to be, worth documenting for the public and then used in in all of their tools. All right. So you can check out that website, and it'll give you lots more methods than I'll talk about here today. Though I'm going to give you just one of the main kind of I'll give you a good universal one, but there are much more detailed, in-depth methods you might find there. Okay, so as I always introduce people, I wanted to introduce JAKOB Nielsen because he also has a pretty interesting bio point here. So this guy, Dr. Nielsen works with Don Norman very closely, and so they have the Nielsen-Norman group here. That if you hear anything from the Nielsen-Norman group about usability or usability methods, it's pretty much kind of the top of the game. They're kind of the ones that really made the term as big as it is today. So yes, he's the smartest person on the web, knows more about what makes websites work than anyone else on the planet. So very humble that he puts those on his website. But and then useit.com, that's his personal. Or at least it has been his online presence site. Okay, so according to Dr. Nielsen, what are 5 components that we should be thinking about when we're assessing usability? So first, how well can we learn to use it? So the first time we encounter a technology, think about things like affordances. These are suggesting, the ways that the human may interface with it, may interact with it. So if we can measure that, and this is something that a lot of times if we're assessing usability, we've got people in a lab, we're doing a controlled experiment, or we're doing some sort of hybrid experiment, and we are going to measure each of these components. So learnability could be something like the time it takes until the first successful interaction, the first successful completion of a task, for example. You could measure that time, and that could be your learnability metric. Efficiency. So once we have learned how to work with the system the first time, how quickly can we then become, proficient? Once we know what we're doing, how fast is it to do an average iteration with this system? Memorability. If I go away for a couple of weeks and come back and I encounter this technology again, how readily can I recall, or recognize the aspects of the task that I can interact with? So how can we reestablish proficiency? And again, if we're measuring things like learnability, we can also measure how do you relearn, once you come back. Errors, how many errors, what types of errors, how severe, right? What are the consequences? And so these are obviously, an outcome that the human did not intend and has some negative aspects to it. And so that's a measure of the quality of the interaction if you're not intending to find yourself in that state. And then the fifth one, satisfaction. So this one's a little, this one necessarily has to be a subjective measure. How satisfied are you on a scale of 1 to 5? There isn't as easy a way to collect objective measures of satisfaction that I know of. But in any case, these are all things you can measure, and if you are doing a usability study, these could be, the categories of your dependent measures, that you're collecting. And then you may be able to say, okay, well, interface A has better usability according to these metrics compared to interface B. Okay, so here's the method I am going to teach you. This is one that I think most people in the human factors domain ought to be at least aware of this method. And it's always something you can look up and refresh yourself, refresh your memory on. But we're going to go through it. So first of all, heuristic. This isn't the first time that we have introduced that term. And my way I want you to think of the word heuristic is that it's a shortcut, it's a rule of thumb, it's something that allows us to get pretty close to a true answer, but we're not going to run it to the 10,000th case to optimize the system. We figure out, hey, this will work well enough, with a relatively much less effort and time spent on the problem. And humans are generally make decisions in this way, right? So if we are making decisions in real time, we're not optimizing computers. This is going to be good enough for me to move forward with. Similarly, in the realm of heuristic analyses, we don't need to identify every single possible problem that could ever happen, optimizing the system. But we can take a set of 10 rules, and that's what I'm about to introduce here, 10 rules. We can evaluate a system according to those 10 rules, and they're going to give us, the data we get from that will be enough for us to make a meaningful advancement, with that analysis or with that, with that human interfacing element, right? So usability heuristic analysis is we're taking the best performing rules, we're going to get the top 80% of the main problems with this system that will ever be discovered in its lifetime. We're not going to get 100%, but we're going to get 80% with a pretty efficient analysis method. All right, here we go. So this is the site I want to point you to for the methodology. I'm going to walk through it here, but definitely check out this website if this is interesting to you, because it's got a lot more. It's up to date. It's got a lot more. It's a really great site for communicating with humans, and interfacing with humans about these methods. So check that out. The idea is you're going to go through this evaluation, and the evaluation essentially consists of, here, think of this rule, and in performing a standard task, how many issues do you uncover, in your human interfacing with that technology, that, bend or break this rule. And you do that, and then you move on to the next rule, and there are 10 of them. By the end, you've got a list, of here's all the possible problems, and they're kind of categorized according to those rules. It's always a good idea to have multiple humans perform this evaluation and then come together. So that works well when you have, like a project group, and you could say, okay, all 3 of us or all 4 of us go through this process individually. and then we can come together and we can combine our inputs and discuss, and then we'll have, greater than the sum of each of us. We can discuss and come up with a good list. Aggregate your results, and then we do severity ratings on. So at this point, everybody has come together with their list of problems interfacing with the system, and you put them, okay, well, I got that problem listed too, so we're not duplicate it, but we'll have one comprehensive list. And then as a team, we can discuss, or we can go and individually do this, but we want to rate the nature of the problems by severity, so that there's a clear path for, okay, here are the issues that you want to address first, that you want to correct first. The most critical to having a usable system, should be these problems addressed first. Okay, so first heuristic, first rule of thumb, and first of 10 is the visibility of system status. So this is when you interface with a system, it needs to communicate to you, the human, what's going on. So if you're ever in a state where, hey, is this, did it take my submit? You click the submit button, did it accept it, or am I going to click it again? And this is because you're not able to visualize fully what the system is doing. And so you're like, hey, did it accept my click? Well, I can't see that it's not giving me any indication that it has. So I'm going to, continue to interact with it. So something like this, okay, we're processing your card, don't close the window or refresh the page. That is telling me, okay, it's doing something. The system status is visible to me. That would be a good example here. Next heuristic, the match between the system and the real world. And so this is about translating, gulf of execution sorts of, problems. So think like, every time I have to do a mental step to translate, here's what I want to do psychologically to what's in the physical world, that's an additional subtask on my cognitive task analysis. So when things naturally associate with the first way you might think of it, so I think of file cabinets, for example, and file folders. This is maybe something that's natural to me for organizing, ideas. And then now there's increasingly, really kind of the standard now for ways that electronic, websites and applications work, is they have sort of file folder type headers, right? And so then that's again a matching between the system I'm interfacing with, the representation, if you will, and the real world. And so I don't have to translate as many steps. Okay. User control and freedom. This one is all about the undo button or the back button, remove from cart. And so this is about, giving somebody flexibility, especially in like, a page-based application, like a website, the ability to move ahead a page or back a page, and to be able to do that freely and readily and have it not disrupt kind of your work or your chain of thought. That's a really freeing thing for a human who may be error prone. So think like, error tolerance. Oops, I can always click undo or go back, and it's not going to be I don't have to close the entire application and restart it, for example. Consistency and standards. So how often do you do a task in the same versus multiple different types, ways? Think about stuff like mode error. And, if you have yourself a context where mode error can occur, like, humans making an error because they interact with the system and they assume a certain mode the system is in, but it's actually in a different mode. So think about like the Strasbourg, the Vosges Mountains, the French, is it Strasbourg? But the flight where the 3.3 descent angle versus negative 3,300 feet descent angle, and they had the mode mixed up, and so that mode error. Anyway, sorry, I'm digressing here. Consistency in the ways that things are performed, and adhering to standards so that people's expectations match their actions or their interactions. So yeah, things like this is second nature now, but when we move from Office to Excel to PowerPoint, or at least what I do, I am appreciative of the fact that I can find, the same functions in roughly the same places. They're consistent, right? So if I want to, like change the font style, I know where to go. It's the home tab in every case, right? And that didn't always used to be the case. I don't know how many of you maybe had used any of the Office products in the days before the file sort of format, but I have, and they used to be very different places where you had to find a lot of these functions across the software packages. Anyway, fifth heuristic here, error prevention. So I didn't name this, and so Dr. Ferris's crusade against error proofing as a concept, or the ability to fully prevent error. I'm not going to comment further. This is NIELSEN'S term, so we'll use it. But error prevention, prevent many problems from occurring, not every single one. We can I can live with that. You're about to close two things. Are you sure? Okay, yes. So this is going to at least be my safety net. My error. I would call this error tolerance instead of prevention, but there you go. All right. 6.1, recognition rather than recall. Recall memory is like, hey, do you remember what you had for lunch 2 days ago? And yeah, you might be able to, but there's some effort here in generating that information, bringing it into your working memory so that you can, comment on it. If instead I said, which of these 3 pieces of food or these 3 types of food did you eat 2 days ago? And you can then, and one of them is so one of them is chicken wings, right? So then okay, oh, well, yeah, I had chicken. Oh, yeah, that was it. And so the recognition memory, when you cue people with some potential options that are probably what they're looking for, and they can select from that, it's a much less effortful way to use memory than recall, making me remember exactly, for example, what that, what the syntax is for that particular function I'm trying to do here. And so this is a nice, feature of a lot of software where, hey, it's giving you the possible commands that you may want to enter there, and you can just recognize rather than having to recall exactly, how you spell that weird, phrasing or whatever. All right. So supporting recognition is a good thing. Recognition rather than recall. Seventh heuristic here, flexibility and efficiency of use. So once people become good with a system, we want them to not have to go through the introductory training material over and over. So think like when you get a new cell phone, smartphone, you turn it on for the first time and it says, welcome, and here's how you do all the stuff in this phone, like here, and it walks you through. That's great for the first day. You don't want to do that every time you turn on the phone. And so you want to develop an efficiency, when you are doing repeated things with that system. So a good example of this are, yes, hotkeys, right? So Control Z. I don't know how many people you could do that in your sleep. Undo, Control Z. Or that's one of the main reasons they have these assignable keys here at the top, the function keys on a lot of keyboards, because they can be used as hotkeys. If you want to, execute something quickly, and you want to do it in the minimalist sort of number of interactions, you can assign it to a hotkey. There you go. So I can tailor frequent actions that way. Aesthetic and minimalist design. So a good theme of a lot of the lectures in this topic, in the Norman and Nielsen stuff, is about what's the cognitive work you're doing, and then don't overdo it. So remember, like with representations, we are abstracting out any dimensions of the real world that are really kind of irrelevant to the cognitive work we're doing. Because additional details just add clutter, just add additional things that our information processing system will process, and that costs resources. So if I have to think about what color the representation of those two vehicles are, if I have to think about which one is the orange or what's the paint job on that one, even though it's totally irrelevant to the cognitive work I'm trying to perform, it takes some of my cognitive resources. So making things simpler, minimalist, And really aesthetically pleasing is often an expression of, hey, it was easy for me to find what I wanted to do with this system. That's a good heuristic as well. So don't include stuff that might seem like, hey, here's additional aspects, that might be interesting or useful, but they really can just kind of slow you down and clutter things if they're, if they're not contributing towards the cognitive work you're trying to do with the task or with the technology. Great. Okay, so number 9, almost there. So ninth heuristic: help users recognize, diagnose, understand, and recover when errors do occur. So this is more error tolerance. It's kind of like saying, so number 5 is sort of like saying, let's reduce the likelihood of errors occurring. And number 9 is, we accept errors will be there and let's recover. Let's help people come back from them. This does not exist. Check the drive and try again. Okay, that's giving me some feedback. It's helping me potentially recover from errors. This is nice when when it says, I'm sorry, it didn't take, but then it highlights where the problem was, for example. I didn't put in my email address there for the 3rd time, whatever, on this form. And so then I don't have to retype the whole thing, right? So give me some clues as to why there's a problem and help me recover. And last but not least, and an important one, help and documentation. So inevitably with any system, there's going to be edge cases. There's going to be times when the user, even the experienced user, needs to check, hey, how do I do that? Let me look at the manual. Let me Google online, how do I do that? The entire world of potential information out there, which might be, I got my new smartphone, I turn it on, and it walks me through the training material at the beginning. That's part of this. If it's, hey, here's your smart assistant. If you have any questions, hey Siri, how do I delete an email or whatever, delete all my email? I could get assistance through smart systems like that. It could be, I Google, hey, how do I find this? Any way that I may search for ways to gain information, and how accessible that help is. These would be the things you assess with that heuristic. Okay, so that's the 10 rules. That's the 10 heuristics. So performing a usability heuristic evaluation is essentially, let's think about visibility of system status in the tasks we may do, with this tool, or whatever it's designed for. And then going through that a few times, and now let's think about the next heuristic. And so if you just kind of iterate through each of these 10 heuristics and think about how they are expressed or not in the system, make your list. Then you go back to your group and you say, okay, let's combine our list, and now let's talk about each of these problems and determine how severe they are. Now, I'm going to give some examples, kind of like a lot of methods in our field, that where you're having humans estimate things. You can be very flexible in adapting these things. I'm going to use a scale from 0 to 4. That's just because I think that's what Nielsen uses, but it is also just an example. But you want to take into account, so a usability issue is severe if it is happening frequently, if it is really difficult to overcome, and if it repeats. Okay, and so you can take into all those account, and however, in your own mind, how you think that translates to severity. But this is an example again. So from 0, there's no problem at all here. It's really just somebody's preference. They wanted a different color for the background, but I like this color, so I'm going to rate it a 0. Cosmetic problem only. It's like, fix it if you have the time. It's not going to affect the functionality. Minor or major usability problem. This is now we're talking about the basic, some function of the system is clunky with regard to some of the heuristics. And then a 4, a catastrophe, is like, hey, you better fix this or people are going to get hurt. So that would be a good example when we're looking at, for example, medical devices and the NICU incubator methods. If you remember back to reading that article, there were some usability heuristic evaluations that went into, okay, which system problems are we going to address first? And so, for example, here we go. So this is a good list of the heuristics identified, by one of the teams, when they did their analysis, and there were three team members, so each of them independently made their severity ratings. And what you'll notice here is two members said, hey, this is a usability catastrophe, and one said it's pretty serious. So the sum total here gives us some indication as to which are the biggest problems and ones that should be prioritized for engineering fixes. Okay, yeah, that one's the biggest. And so then this was, again, I don't remember how deeply the article maybe would have discussed this or in class, but there was a usability catastrophe here in that manipulating this dial is used to rotate through these menu items, which is all right. But then when this other menu would pop up, you would still end up using this dial. And there were also, and you're trying to go up and down, and there are up and down buttons over here. But these two buttons are not what you're supposed to press. These change the temperature, not navigate in the menu. And so this was a frequent issue. All three team members encountered this confusion, identified it as, hey, this is a usability catastrophe. We need, this should be the target of redesign. Okay, last slide here, I think. Yep. So check out these websites. These are really fun. If you're thinking, hey, Ferris, these are dated examples now, and they kind of are. Some of my slides have dated graphics, and there's a lot of things where I find myself saying, well, it should be this way, and then I realize it kind of has been that way now for 5 years or so. So, I mean, the heuristics still hold true. There are examples of applying all these 10 heuristics, in their pretty much worded exactly the same, but to newer technologies like virtual reality. You can see NN group, that's the Nielsen-Norman group. And so, check out these links as well. Applied to everyday life, Zen Haiku, that may be interesting to some of you. All right, thanks everybody. So signing off here from the Ground Vehicle Systems Center, and I will see you next week on Tuesday. I think you've got stuff due, don't forget. Oh, last thing on midterm scores are posted. There should be comments about points taken off. I am also preparing a review that I think I'll either record during my travels or we'll talk about it on Tuesday. All right, happy, for those of you who are celebrating, happy Easter weekend. Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.